Right. Right, I think we're live now. So I just want to say good evening, all Facebook, YouTube folks that are watching tonight. Good evening. Thank you for joining us again on Say It Loud. Tonight we're going to be talking about leadership and legacy. And I want to believe that this conversation is extremely relevant and it's right for this time. I'm going to start with an analogy and say, have you ever watched the track and field section of the athletic games? Most of us have. Have you ever watched a relay? In track and fields, the 4x4 relay, apart from the 100 meters, is one of my favorites. And this topic tonight reminds me of a relay. The most important part of a relay is not the running or the speed at which the athlete is running, but it's the passing of the baton. Because you see, if the baton falls or is dropped during the transfer to the next runner, your successor, you are disqualified. And it's not only you that's disqualified, but the whole team, all 4 runners on the team is disqualified. Once the baton is successfully transferred, if the athlete wins, everybody wins. That goes without saying. So tonight, the question is, who are you passing the baton to? Are you leading to lead or leading to pass? To pass a legacy to the next generation. Tonight, our panelists, they span different generations, and we'll hear their views and perspective on the topic. I want to introduce them. Firstly, we have Felicia Watkins. She's a wife, a mother, a daughter, and a firm believer in Jesus Christ. She's a previous youth leader in the Baptist Church and has now moved into her administrative gift with her virtual assistant business, Russia VA. It's Russia Virtual Assistant. Felicia is an intercessor. She's a teacher. She describes herself as a seer. And she enjoys being a light in the world and an ambassador for Christ. I want to introduce, secondly, Rashawn Grant. Rashawn is a speaker and a budding young author from North London. He grew up in Tottenham with his nan. And he recalls being told by his mother that whatever he sets his mind to, he can do. And he later went to University of Warwick, where he majored in law and business. And I think he's recently graduated. Whilst at uni, he was one of the leaders of the Men's Fellowship on campus, and he's worked with over hundreds of young men, offering support, mentorship, brotherhood, who needed a fostering. They kind of foster an environment of biblical learning. He sat on the undergraduate program committee working with senior staff to promote student interests. In his 3rd year, he was elected chair of the Warwick Business School Student Staff Liaison, managing over 25 course representatives in service to over 1,000 business students. He's well-traveled. Rashawn is set to graduate this year, and he has graduated, and he's embarked on writing his first novel, Men of the Good, which focuses on manhood, family, coming to terms with teenage mistakes. This is set to be published in 2022. Rashawn says that the best decision he's ever made is giving his life to Christ. We have Julian Mitchell. Julian is the leader of Deeper Well Assembly, a brand new church planted in East London. By profession, Julian is a leadership and management consultant, and he's also a proud husband to Shadeen Mitchell. There's a gentleman on this panel that goes without introduction, Pastor Wayne Brown. And I just asked, Pastor Wayne Brown is the pastor of Life Church here in London. I'm just going to ask him to elaborate a little bit on himself. Pastor Wayne?
Thank you, Eve. And let me just say, the reason why I'm introducing myself is because I was dilatory in giving the profile to Eve. So this is my fault. But yeah, I'm Wayne Brown, pastor of Life Church. Got several interests, and one of them is business management. Like Julian, I do a bit of management consultancy. But the idea is that everything I do stems from the principle of what would God do and what would I allow God to do through me. So this is me. We'll hear more.
Thank you. And we have another guest who will be joining us later on the program tonight, Reverend Grace Bali Balagan. She'll join us and we'll do a brief intro when she comes on. So I want to say thank you to all of you for agreeing to come and share in this discussion on leadership and legacy. So that's what we'll be talking about tonight. Again, thank you to all those who've joined us online. Just give us a like, leave a comment, let us know who you are so we can acknowledge you. And also, if you have anything to share, it's welcome. Please put it in the comments box. Any questions at all, any ideas, please share and let us know, okay? Thank you for joining us. Brother Aubrey, good evening. Thank you for joining us. Please also share this live video so that others will know that we're here and we're having this discussion tonight. I know football, I'm not sure football is on tonight, but it's none of the major teams, thank God. So hopefully you can join us tonight, okay? So
if it was yesterday, it would have been a bit of a problem.
I know. I know. Right. So we're gonna crack on. And I'll just start with the questions. Just something I want to say on top of what I've said before. Jesus transformed 12 ordinary and unlikely individuals into first-generation leaders who started a movement that continues to affect the course of this world up to today. And, you know, Christ himself is more than a spiritual leader. He gave a practical and effective leadership model that can be used in all strata of life, all organizations, people, situations. You know, so that means leadership it's generational. And it's fair to also say that in some ways, all of us are leaders. Leadership is not easy. We talk about it, you know, some leaders get bashed, but leadership is not easy, and leading people is not easy. As the old adage goes, heavy is the head that wears the crown, right? So it's not all about spiritual leadership, because we live in a world that is governed by laws, regulations, and we've learned to subscribe to these, you know, and create a balance by educating ourselves, so that we are not found wanting. And as a matter of fact, we can, you know, give out what we can't give what we don't have. We can't pour from empty cups. So it's what we learn in the world around us, through our work, etc., through our education, and so on, that we can use to impart and teach in the church and wherever we are. So I'm just going to start by asking, Wayne, I'm going to start with you, if you don't mind. What was your experience like growing up? And in terms of leadership, we know who your father is, and we all can testify a lot of things when it comes to leadership, but you seem to have had a good role model. But the question is, did you have good leadership? I'm a bit nervous. I don't. Do you think you have had very good leadership growing up around?
Are you talking about the leadership from my dad or from my parents, or
yes,
leadership within the church?
From your dad, because the question is, did you have good leadership around you, and how did that leadership impact you?
Well, I think, I've been one of the fortunate ones, in that, dad was a leader and a church leader, and a pretty good one at that.
Yeah.
The fortunate nature is that good leaders normally surround themselves with other good leaders.
Yeah.
And therefore, whether it be by chance or by luck, I've perhaps, I guess the biological term would be by osmosis, just sucked in the surroundings of what leadership looks like. And I think, in fairness, yes, I've had good leadership, but it is amazing what happens when the leadership or good leadership is substituted with questionable leadership. And then you actually recognize what good leadership is. And then it becomes not a matter of whether your father or your mother or your parents or those around you that like you are good leaders, but it becomes a matter of you've actually experienced what it is to see good leadership. And so poor leadership becomes highlighted in those matters. And so we've got to take out of the context, and perhaps I shouldn't run away from it as much as I do, but I do tend to run away from the comparison in terms of who that is, because trying to live in the shadow of someone who's done excellently adds burden, adds weight, adds more problems than sometimes it solves. But the truth is, I've been one of the fortunate ones to see and to acquire by osmosis what great leadership looks like. We can't hear you. Sorry, Lee. I think you're muted.
Following up, you mentioned good leadership a lot of times in your comments. What does that look like? When you say good leadership, what are you referring to? Or what would you class as good?
Let me put it like this. So good leadership is the ability to allow those that are coming up to fail in a controlled environment. I think that, for me, is the ultimate test of what good leadership is. It's to know how far to allow the reins to go, but it's also to create the environment for what I like to call controlled failure. It's one thing to fail within the premises of a great, big, wide world. It's another thing to fail behind closed doors. But a good leader will cultivate the environment for failure within a controlled manner. And what that does, it sets you up for success when there are no controls.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people will see, and you've got some great guys on this, and by guys I mean guys and girls, sorry. We've got some great people on this on this talk show tonight. And I guarantee you the failure that they've had wouldn't have been seen by the masses. But when Rashawn's book comes out, Julian's already got his book, and I think he's second one. I don't know whether that's coming out. And the business that I've just heard about the virtual assistant, when people see the successes, they say, oh, wow, look what you've done. But nobody sees the failures. So a good leader will really guarantee and ensure that the environment for failure, or rather there's a controlled environment for failure, so that actually your successes can be public.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Wayne.
No
for Rashawn, what is your perception of leadership, whether it's in the church, what you've seen so far in society? You've been exposed to a great extent at university, and you're very exposed in the church. What's your perception of leadership?
So my perception of leadership is that I think the best definition I've heard thus far is from a friend of mine called Mike. He delivers on these sessions and leadership sessions, and he says that leadership is about maximizing the efforts of others towards a particular goal. And I think that that sets one up for a solid foundation in what leadership is, because you can't lead, as much as you must be a leader of yourself before you lead others, you're not a leader if you're on an island, at least by the popular definition. You have to have other people that are prepared to follow you.
Right.
And I think the last part, which is that you must maximize the efforts of people towards a goal, intimates that you have to know where you're going. So in terms of what I've seen, I think I've been exposed to really, I don't know how to describe it. It's a mixed bag. I was exposed to leadership in Warwick Business School. I was the chair of the student council in the time when the coronavirus came about. And organizations all over the world didn't know what to do with the coronavirus. At Warwick, we were trying to figure it out. We didn't think it would last as long. It disrupted heavily the way we did examinations. We have a lot of international students, so that heavily affected their ability to participate in exams. Lockdown was from March, so in the run-up to exam season, people couldn't study as much. We had to have a policy for mitigating people's grades. We had to have a safety net. So I think for myself, I've seen what leadership looks like when you throw a spanner in the works and you don't know what to do. And I think when that happens, the best thing I've seen people do is listen, because it's very easy to panic and, just say something and do something. But the best thing I've heard people, or I've seen people do when things go crazy, and coronavirus is the craziest thing that's happened in a very long time, the best thing I've seen people do is listen. Does that answer your question?
Well, I like your answer. I like your response to it. But I do appreciate that. Thank you. And for Felicia, and feel free to just come in, and if you have something to say, just say it. It's an open discussion. Yeah. For Julian and Felicia, in terms of leadership and legacy and their purpose in the context of, church, etc., just generally, what can you just say a bit on the definition of leadership? What is leadership? What's legacy? And the importance of these?
Okay, since Felicia raised her hand, I guess I'll go.
Sorry, Felicia. Yeah.
I think one of the things for me that's really important when we consider legacy also is, if leadership has been done correctly within the context of legacy, then there is an element of, there is something that doesn't have to be built again. And I think when we are having to continue to build, not in the sense that building doesn't always have to take place, but we're having to build the same thing. I think it speaks to maybe some of the failings, the misunderstandings, or the misconceptions of leadership within that generation. And so if another generation that's following has to continuously rebuild a foundation, then I think what it tells me is that there are a few things that it immediately tells me. Number one, it tells me that there are some incorrect tools that are being used to build. Number two, there is some incorrect blueprints that have been drawn up by whoever was responsible. And number three, nobody bothered to check what is going to be the long-term effects of what I am currently trying to build and sustain. And so I think when we're dealing with legacy, the number one thing for me within the context of leadership is that it always has to be forward thinking, in the sense of what I am endeavoring to build, what I'm endeavoring to develop is not for the purposes of the applause today, but is for the purposes of the stability tomorrow.
Thank you. Felicia, just go in.
Yeah, I agree with Julian, but I'm just going to expand a bit. Obviously, when it comes to leadership and legacy, I always go to the Bible. I can't help it. And the person that I see that really defines good leadership and legacy is David for me. Reason being is because obviously we saw his transition from being a shepherd boy to a king, right? And even in his kingship, he was such a people's person. He led correctly. He trained his men how to war so he wouldn't have to go out anymore, etc. But in terms of legacy, what I really like every time when I read the scriptures is that, his son Solomon, the time his son came on board, Solomon didn't lift a finger in war. The generation, the time that Solomon reigned, there was no war. Why? Because David, dealt with all the warfare of Israel before them. So by the time Solomon came, he had rest, he had plenty, and he was able to build. And let's even go further than Solomon. Even when Jesus Christ came, David's name was still being spoken, Jesus, thou son of David. And so when it comes to leadership and legacy, it's just, David is just one of the many of the scrolls in the Bible that I feel like really represents leadership and legacy at the same time. Just like what Julian said, years, centuries, decades gone, it's not David wasn't somebody that was just applauded then in his lifetime, but decades later. And I feel like within the church, unfortunately in the Black churches, well, maybe not so the Black churches before people get a bit touchy, but within the church, when people die, they die with the baton in their hands. When people die, the ministry dies. And just again, what Julian said, we're going to have to rebuild the foundation again and keep going. And then when that person dies, it's just like a vicious cycle. And I think, with a lot of our generals, our fathers that are passing away, during this time, I haven't seen so many deaths last year, this year, with so many kingdom generals passing away. It's like, why is it that, we should already know who's going to take their place, just like Moses. The people knew that Joshua was the one to take Moses' place. But can we say the same thing within the kingdom of God right now? Our favorite leaders, our popular leaders, do we know who's taken their place? Do we know who the baton is going to be passed to? So I just think that, I don't know if this answers your question, but I just think that's the area within the kingdom, within church, that we need to deal with, being very clear. If when we are in organizations, companies, we know if the CEO or the managers or the directors are stepping down, we know exactly who's going to take over. But why is it in the kingdom we're not sure? Automatically, sometimes we think that it's the biological sons and daughters, but as we see in scriptures, that's never really the case, except from the lineage of Judah and the customs of the kingship. But we've seen with Elijah and Elisha, we've seen with Saul's biological son didn't take the throne, but God called somebody out from the wilderness. So I just feel like in the kingdom right now, I think we need to really deal with, we do have great leadership, bad leadership, but when it comes to legacy, passing on the baton, I think there's a lot of grey areas and it's not that clear. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. I can feel the fire already, Felicia. Thank you so much.
It's Julian. He laid the foundation. He passed the button.
Just before I say more on that, I just want to say to those on Facebook, I see a few messages coming in, but I'm picking up the messages quite late. There's some delayed responses. So just forgive me if I'm not acknowledging you immediately as you post. I've Brother Aubrey, Darren, welcome. Darren said he's grabbing his popcorn and notepad tonight. You do need it. Charmaine Browning, Noel Blake, Stacy Shallow, welcome and thank you all for joining us. That's what I can see so far. But thank you so much. Remember to like and share and put your comments, your questions in the box so we can, talk about other than what we have on paper here to talk about tonight. Right, so far, I've heard sustainability of leadership. I've heard integrity of leadership. If the foundation isn't built correctly, something is wrong. And obviously, whatever is built on top of that will not last. It will fall. It will fail. Felicia, you mentioned something about Solomon. And I'm curious, Wayne, do you think it was, I know God is faithful to his promises. You know, when he said he's going to bless David and through his lineage and whatever, yes. But was it that Solomon chose to lead differently? I know Felicia said Solomon didn't have a lot of battles to fight, and, you know, he was just more concentrated on the building of the temple and so on and so forth. But was it that as a young man, he chose to uphold the integrity his dad had and honor God, but just do it in a different way? And I'm asking that in a very slightly provocative way, because when we have young leaders with ideas,
yeah,
you know, I'm going to maintain that principle, but I'm going to do it this way. And older leaders may fail to see the perspective that this younger person is coming from. And again, this is not necessarily just about church, but they fail to see where a younger leader or younger person is coming from. And they're kind of shut down, like, no, you're trying to destroy everything, you're trying to change everything. And because they fail to see the angle from which this person is coming from. So did Solomon just choose a different way to lead? He could have fought a few battles.
So I'm going to say something right off the bat that will probably cause some offense. And this is no offense to anyone.
The program is called Say It Loud.
I'm going to say it loud. And this is not to offend anyone on the panel, but it may offend some of your listeners. I think tradition is going to kill the church, and that is nothing that I say lightly. I honestly believe that tradition is going to be the destruction of what we currently know as church. And the reason why I say that is because what happens is, as generations grow and as generations iterate, even within my own household, and we had a joke the other day, a Sunday, we were at just a family gathering, and we had a joke that our kids don't know what it's like to hear Hakuna Matata, Washanda, Chicken Tikka Masala, Hustala Mohonda, and get their toe stamped on. My kids have no idea what it's like. And what happens is, if that becomes a traditional expression of what Christianity is, then what we do, instead of having an authentic expression of what Christianity is, we become imitators of what we've seen, and we become victim to our traditions. So here's what happens then. So as it relates to Solomon, I think he did a great thing. Well, what Solomon did was this. He said, listen, God, I need wisdom. And I think wisdom was the principal thing. So if we're going to contextualize this in today's world, what Solomon said is, I need a data analyst to come and sit beside me and give me not just the raw data, but decode it for me so that I have the information from that data in order to make the best decisions. So if I'm going to build a temple, I need a quantity surveyor in order to tell me. And I know, we've got, well, God told him the instructions. God was there, his quantity surveyor. But guess what I need now? I need a construction. I need a foundations guy. I need someone that knows how to erect this and knows how to follow orders and instructions. Because if I'm praying for wisdom, I need people around me that can follow instructions. And so we've got two things. We've got the understanding that tradition is good, but that tradition can also kill and destroy. And we don't want to follow traditions blindly. We want to actually move away from religiosity and into relationship with God. And that means, I don't know how deep to get, how quick to get it, but I'm telling you, I could tell you some stuff now about me that would shut this whole thing down, because it's not traditional as it relates to Christianity. It's not about what we do. All right, here's a perfect example. I'm going to say this and then shut up. I've decided to live my Sunday how I live my Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. and not to live my Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, how I live my Sunday. If we can switch it and live Monday through Saturday and live Sunday rather like we live Monday through Saturday, we're closer to understanding what this whole thing is about. But if my Sunday experience is unrefutably different than my Monday through Saturday lived experience, then that's an indication that I'm trapped in tradition. I'm trapped in culture. I'm trapped in something that actually doesn't speak to what God wants me to do on this earth. I'll leave it there for now. You're muted, Eve. You're muted. Talk to us. You're still
we're operated by a switch, so we
go.
turn on and turn off as we like.
Yeah. Okay.
But thank you for that. I want to we have a beautiful lady that's just joined us, and I just want to do a very brief introduction and she came in at the right time. This is Reverend Grace Bali Balagan. She's a qualified HR and change management professional with experience in oil and gas and retail businesses. She's a lecturer and runs a foundation program in theology at St. Mellitus College. Reverend Grace is currently completing her doctoral studies in ministry leadership at the Pentecostal Theological Seminary. She is chair of Bringing Hope Limited charity, of the Bringing Hope Limited charity, and a trustee of the Ecumenical Council for Corporate Responsibility. Reverend Grace provides leadership development and strategic consultancy to a number of charities, small businesses, and councils. She has 2 amazing adult children whom she loves dearly. And I just want to say, Reverend Grace, welcome.
Thank you so much.
Welcome, and thank you for joining us. And we started shortly, but so far we've touched on what leadership, our perception of leadership, what it is, what so far it sounds like what it's not as well. I think everything is coming out at the same time. We talk about the types of leadership, the integrity, this type of leadership that is sustainable. Good leadership, what it looks like or what it should look like. So someone spoke about an example of David and Solomon. And my last question was whether or not, Solomon chose to lead differently from his father, whereas his father fought a lot of wars, according to the scriptures, of course. And, he left a legacy to his kids, and, we hear about it, we see it. But Solomon, my question here is, did Solomon choose to lead in a different way? So Pastor Wayne was just commenting on that. And I'm just going to ask you, I'm going to baptize you in the deep right now. Right. Are we seeing enough young leaders or leaders emerging in the church today? And as I said before, you are currently undertaking this particular study. Tell us a little bit about that, and also what you've discovered so far as what might be contributors to an underdevelopment of leaders in the church. Is there a gap? Why?
Thank you, Eve. And I just wanted to say hello to everyone as well. And to Pastor Wayne, I just came in on the back of what Pastor Wayne was saying, and just loved what he was saying about, tradition and being different. And you definitely are, Pastor Wayne, definitely different, which is good. It's fantastic. That's what we need. But there definitely is a massive gap in the church today. And there are a number of reasons why that is the case. So the research I've been doing is predominantly on the Church of God, New Testament Church of God in the UK. And I'm also looking at HTB as a model for leadership transition. And what I discovered, not just myself, but I've been working with a few other ministers and lay people, that we had to look over the last few decades, and we noticed that when UT was formed, it was formed by, you know, more or less young people in their early 20s into their early 30s. They were the go-getters. They were the, you know, ones who went out and did all the church planting. But that's not the model that we see today. It's completely the opposite. And if you look at the history of New Tea as well, you'll see that as these, you know, these founders who came from the Caribbean, predominantly Jamaica, as they came into this country and started to lay the foundations for all of the churches that we see today, they were in leadership for the next 20, 30 years. And during that time, we believed that leadership, pastoring was for life. You know, there wasn't really anything else that they would do. And I'm talking really generally now. So when they were coming into ministry, they were coming in for life. It was something that they would die doing. And as a result, there was an impact. The impact was they weren't all necessarily raising up other leaders. And so over time, when we now get into the 70s and 80s, those who were coming through, the potential leaders, those who could be recognized, for example, for ministry in, you know, different ways, not just pastoring, evangelists, etc., weren't necessarily being put forward. And so we started to see a trend that in the Black church, ministers weren't going through for ordination until their late 40s and 50s, early 50s. And if you think about if that's happening, well, what is the impact? If we're not releasing, if we are not releasing potential ministers or leaders, what is happening to the generation that's coming behind? And we're coming into the 21st century. We've got Generation Z, we've got the millennial generations, and these generations are completely different than, you know, the ones that preceded them. They are entrepreneurial. They, in their workplaces, hold budgets of millions, but in the church, they're just not being recognized, not being released. And the pattern that I was seeing is that because really there was a number of things, but one of the main things was because my minister might not be coming into their role as a pastor until they're in their 50s. And they're going to hold on to that position for as long as they can. Understandably, they've had to wait a long time to get there. So I did some research. I did some surveys in 2019 before lockdown kicked in. And this went to all the ministers within UT. And I had about 40% response rate. And the results were startling. Not only were the majority of ministers not mentoring, if they were mentoring, so let's say 75% of them weren't mentoring. Those who were mentoring randomly. It wasn't intentional. It wasn't, you know, I've recognized that potential in someone. I'm going to work with them. You know, when I was growing up, this is what our leaders did for us. So the other thing is they weren't also being mentored. They didn't have anyone to turn to. And so this is something that is happening not just in UT but in many churches, that there is that gap. It must be bridged, and I'm sure there are a number of ways in which to do that.
Eve, I think you're muted again.
Muted again.
I need to remember to unmute. Sorry. Anyone want to add to what Grace has just said? Yes. Please.
Me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to go on the back of what Grace said. Yeah, as you said, You said the key word there, the black church, and that's exactly what I said, but then I had to retract because I didn't want to offend anyone. But I completely agree with you. And something, even within my own business, I've noticed this thing. Because the church is not embracing a lot of millennials and younger generations and releasing them into ministry, a lot of us are using our entrepreneurial grace to do the work of the Lord. We're not waiting on the laying of hands anymore.
Exactly.
We're not waiting for the calling out and the prophetic word anymore. You have something, and all of you might notice this, but the level of coaches, young coaches, motivational speakers are on a rise right now. And they're using the platforms, the social medias, right? But instead of us calling it ministry, we call it coaching or mastermind sessions, etc. And we're doing exactly what we would be doing in the church, speaking life into them, giving them affirmations, giving people affirmations, telling people that they're great and that, for some of us, well, not me anyway, but some of them, they have to be very universal. So they won't say Jesus, but they will say the universe. And they'll pick. But the difference, the downside, even though we're trying to bring the same model of church within the corporate world, the problem is that we're not really pronouncing Jesus, we're not using his name, and we're not, laying on hands and delivering and healing people. But the word of the Lord is being preached, but in a different model. And it's only if you have the Spirit of God and you truly understand. When you listen to these people, you can tell this person's a Christian, And there are even some people that they will say, there's a book, they will say there's a book and there's this quote, and the quotes are from the Bible, but they don't say it to their audiences. They don't say it to their viewers. So a lot of the times, if the church doesn't want to embrace us, if the church don't want to release us, we're already going out in the corporate world. However, it is still important for us to have our fathers to say, you know what, even though these four walls can't hold you, I know there's an entrepreneurial grace over your life. I know that you need to go to the media industry. I know that you need to go to this industry. So let me release you there. But that's still not happening, because when it even comes to kingdom building, we're just thinking about the four worlds. But thank God for Mrs. Rona, who came and shut down the whole thing. Mate, the churches are not open. People are still scared to come into the churches. So now we have online. Again, there's pros and cons to that, because now everybody's a prophetic voice. Everybody's preaching, because anyone can go live with a ring light and an iPad in front of their face. But this Mrs. Rona caused a lot of us now to come out of hiding, to come out of the cave, and to do what God has called us to do without the laying of hands. But at the same time, it's hard, because we want that spiritual backing. We want that quote unquote spiritual covering to let us know, okay, do it like this, or say it like this, or let me pray with you, or have you been on fasting, that checkup. So yes, Grace, I completely agree with you that, we're not being pushed out, and people are, being ordained from when they're 50 years old. But I'm sorry, my generation's not waiting for that. We're not waiting until 50 to do the work of the Lord, because we know there's an urgency right now. We are in the midst. We're in the world, but not of it. We're getting the phone calls of our peers wanting to commit suicide. People taking edibles and trying out drugs. We are now forced to do the work of the Lord without the clerical colours and without somebody calling up our name to the front. We are in the midst when we're working at the nightclubs to pay our tuitions, or when we're at the football stadiums serving the footballers and stuff drinks. We're forced, because we're in these environments where there is still a need for Christ. But I'm not going to think, hold on, I'm not a pastor, I'm not an evangelist, I haven't been ordained. We're not thinking about that, because we know that there's an urgency. And so can I blame the leadership and the 40%? Yes and no, because it's what they were used to. Maybe when they were young, and they were grown up and they knew that there was a call of God, but they were sat down and said, no, you're not ready. So it's kind of, it's difficult to relate that back to bad or good leadership. I don't know where I would put that.
And I think, if I may, one of the worst things about what Sister Grace mentioned, and thank you so much, Sister Grace, for doing the research that you're doing, because if there's one word that we're unfamiliar with in the Church of God at times, it's data, because we don't tend to take a data-driven approach to a lot of issues. But I think the worst thing, or one among a group of very, very bad things about what you've spoken, is that we now have a generation of leaders who we do not know. We see them and we hear them preach, but we have no clue who they are and what they're about. And this becomes an issue when you now try and correct me. Because yes, I'm doing wrong. It's not that I'm doing right. I'm not trying to be wrong and strong. But God corrects me because God knows me. I don't know you. So
relationship.
And this is someone, for myself, who grew up with my grandparents. So I know what it is to, and I grew up, my father's from Trinidad and Tobago, so I used to go there every year. So I know what it is to be walking down the road, doing something you're not supposed to do. By the time you reach home, someone done call your people already, said that, it was down the road, and you're now going home to get reprimanded again. But people, you grew up in the UK, with your parents who were themselves children of Caribbean migrants, you wouldn't know that. So when someone who's a stranger to you, even if they are a reverend such and such, comes to now tell you why you're not doing this, why I haven't seen you in church in a while, you're looking at them like, who are you? And why are you in my space? And I think that's such a detriment, because, we're very quick to speak about Solomon, who was one of David's sons, but we are also reminded of the story of Absalom, who rebelled against David, and who set a fire to get David's attention, and who tried to attack David, all because there was a conflict between them, all because Absalom thought that he was going to be king. But a bit like some of my age mates, my peers, I'm 23 years old, we have a lot of very talented, very, very gifted people doing the same things. You have a lot of overlap. You tend to see the same kind of models repeated. And where we would benefit from correction, some of my peers just ain't trying to hear it because I don't know you. And I think that's a really, really dire issue. What's that for? I think that's a really, really, really dire issue that, we need to sit down and think about and start all over again with. Remember to unmute, Sister Eve.
I'm not good at this. Bear with me. I'm learning. Right. It makes you think, though, Rashawn, you've disappeared, but it just makes you ask the question or think about relationship and the importance of having relationship with whoever, establishing that foundation, getting people to know who you are, getting people to see you, see what you do, to kind of watch you, but it's important in order to influence, because leadership to me is about influence, and in order to influence you, it's important to have that relationship with people.
Truly,
leadership is about people. So yeah, I do agree with what you said, Rashawn. Thank you for that. Thank you so much. I want my next question will be I was gonna ask you, the millennials, do you think, or just openly, do you think younger people are marginalized when it comes to leadership? and what time, and marginalized because you hear about they know your place and things like that, and you need to calm down, or you're too emotional, or things like that, too headstrong, and you hear these little terms popping up every now and again. So do you think younger leaders are marginalized when it comes to leadership? And you mentioned a couple, but the types of barriers millennials face, have to face to be taught or to access leadership roles. Anybody, can you just anyone elaborate on this? Are young leaders marginalized?
I think I actually don't think young leaders are marginalized out of leadership. I think they're marginalized out of position. And those are two very different things. And so I think when we look at opportunities to sit in seats, then I think fundamentally, yes, I think there are some obstacles, there are some challenges there, and for whatever reason also. But I think if we're talking about being marginalized for leadership, absolutely not, because I think within the sphere that each and every single one of us has been given to create as much impact as possible, I think it's quite a naive thing to assume that you can do that from a platform or from a position. Yeah. I think younger leaders today do also have to come into the understanding that you can be as vocal and as impactful without what we have presented historically as a position of leadership. Yeah. And we can do that in a myriad of different ways, and it doesn't take a position to do that. And so in the short answer, I think that young leaders probably need to come into a realignment of the face of their own leadership and what they need to do with it. But are they marginalized from having that impact? Absolutely not. The only thing, and I guess the only person that can stop them doing that is themselves. But if we're now talking about within the confines of having position, and this is not even within the church, this is also within the secular and business world too. If we're talking about marginalization within certain seats that they sit in, then yeah, there's certainly a case for that. And there's certainly an argument too.
Anyone else want to comment?
I think it's really interesting, Eve, and I've got so much to say on this. I don't know.
Go ahead.
The line, but I think it's really interesting that David Cameron was Prime Minister at age 43, 42, something like that. And yet at I don't know the stats, but when I became a bishop at the age of, I can't remember what age it was, 37, maybe 36.
It's not that long ago. Come on now.
Well, it seems like it was. At least what, 2014, whenever that was. I was the youngest bishop in the church, and that's crazy. And what it means is that actually, just as Reverend Grace was saying, that we've missed it. We've missed something significant. If a guy can run the country at age 42, but you can't run a church at age 20, there's something wrong. And I think there's something wrong to the point where, and this would be really interesting. I don't want to impact your doctoral studies, Grace, but it will be really interesting to find out whether there is a link between the types of messages preached and the intentional or unintentional mentorship that takes place. Because what I find and what I found is that, and myself and Julian, I think we had a 5-minute call that turned into an hour-and-a-half conversation about what is really, quote unquote, supposed to be preached in the church. Now, for me, my whole goal is to make myself redundant. As a pastor and a leader, if my church needs me, I have 100% failed, because I haven't preached the message of grace. I've preached the message of control. Now, what I mean by that is this, is that if the message changes, the attitude to leadership has to change. And if Sunday after Sunday, I'm preaching about the do's and the don'ts, the whys and the why nots, the haves and the have nots, and I'm not speaking about the love of God, the grace of God, the goodness of God, the forgiveness of God, then what it means is that I'm actually perpetuating a tradition of control. I'm not actually bringing people into the liberty and the freedom of what God did in giving us his son, Jesus Christ. And here's a test for you guys. Here's a test. We know the scripture, right? And you guys can complete it. The wages of sin is.
Yeah.
All right. And that's where the message normally stops. That's where the preacher gets his preaching points. That's where we get that you shouldn't do and you haven't done. And the wage of sin is death. And we don't read the end of that same verse, which says, but the gift of God is eternal life. So the question is this. In this context, would you rather have the wages or the gift? And if you'd have the gift, then what it does, it cancels out the wages. But if I preach the consequence of the wages, then I'm not liberating people into leadership. I'm not liberating people into freedom. I'm not liberating people to live their life and to live their best life. I'm not liberating people. What I'm actually doing is keeping, whether knowingly or unknowingly, a net over the church's head, because actually I need my position. I need to be your pastor.
Come on.
And the truth is, I should make myself redundant. That's the purpose of every pastor out there. Remember, leadership, for me, again, good leadership is the ability to fail in a controlled environment, right? And so that's just one of the things, which means I've got to create that environment. Yeah. And when, you know, the worst thing about some of our traditional stuff, the backbench, when you fail and make a mistake, I'm sorry, it cancels you. You are now cancelled. When you do something that doesn't meet up to the standard of our traditional expectations, cancelled. But if we ever change the message, and when I say change the message, change our message to the true gospel, which literally means your sins are forgiven, past, present, and future. It means that now you've stepped into a liberation, and I'm not a liberation theologian, but you stepped into a liberation, which means I'm no longer trying to achieve wages. I'm walking in the gift. And that allows me to put people that wouldn't normally qualify for position in position. It allows me to put people that wouldn't normally be associated with a preaching gift or a teaching gift or a ministry skill. It allows me to put them in position because I understand that they are operating out of the gift and not out of the threat of the consequence of the wages.
Wow, that was deep.
Put myself on mute.
That was deep and rich. But you know what? I'm just going to piggyback on that a little bit about this, the preaching the message of control. In my head, I'm of the same notion that there's this message of servitude being preached as well. You know, rather than leadership to me, rather than being who you're called to be. Do you think that the church is subscribing to a culture of servitude, always like encouraging us to be followers? And, you know,
let me just say, and I don't want to hold the conversation, but let me just qualify. I honestly believe that because of our traditional practices, most leaders don't even understand or realize what they're doing. I'll put that caveat in there. I don't believe it's deliberate, but when you perpetuate what you've always done, then actually, you're ignorant to the fact that something new needs to happen. Let me. Here you go.
Are we not then? But you see, are we not then, Reverend Grace? I know you want to come in, but are we not then perpetuating this culture of slave mentality?
Yeah.
Slavery it's saying, okay, don't go to college, not directly these words, but don't go to college and learn to become a business owner. Go to college and learn and come and find a job. You have a boss. That kind of mentality, that kind of servitude, kind of, that's what I'm hearing. So I don't know, I could be wrong.
I just want to come on the back of what Bishop Wayne was saying.
Yeah.
I think it goes back again to, if we are looking at particularly, the denomination, New Tea, Black-led denominations in this country, the historical facts say that many of our forefathers in the faith, when they came, we know that they were rejected, especially the males, the black males. We know that in the workplace they faced a lot of racism, and the church was a way of validating them. The church was a way of, because their gifts were recognized. And if you think about it historically, they found, peace. They found their authority. They found their position in the church, and a lot of them, looking again at history, gave everything to the church. So they might have been serving full time in the church. Can you imagine now taking that status and power away? It means a lot, because they have and just going back to what Wayne was saying about the link, is there a link between the messages? The messages are going to have a level of control. The problem with leadership is that leadership needs power. Leadership is a gift. And I know I missed the beginning, but Romans 12:28 and 1 Corinthians 12:28 both point to the gift of leadership. So you can't lead without power. We're empowered by dunamis, but at the same time, power can corrupt. And just going back again to Bishop Wayne's point, leadership has to be Christ-centered. We have to be preaching grace. But if the power becomes corrupted because you're wanting to hold on to status, that corrupts. You're wanting to hold on to control. You're wanting to hold on to validation. The people are validating you all the time. Then we are moving away from Christ-centered leadership. And it's no longer about grace. It's about dogma. It's about legalism, which we have seen a lot in the black church. Over decades.
That's right.
And it might touch on this. I don't know about the servitude. I think, again, I don't think that they do it, or leaders do it deliberately. It's subconscious. And the second point I wanted to put in, that we must look at in terms of history, and if we compare ourselves to other non-black denominations, we didn't have a training center until quite late. I think it was the 80s. From the 80s, we started to see leadership training centers put in, where our ministers were being trained. Their messages, the doctrine and the theology that they needed wasn't always there. So they had a particular type of message. Hopefully that's changing with the education centers that we have now in place. We've got to change the message, and when we do change the message, there should be a better improvement within our congregations. They need to be released, not bashed over their head.
Thank you. Thank you. Can I just acknowledge some comments online? Darren Evans Henry, the wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life. So he completed it, Bishop. Stacy Schaller, especially if you have to mentor, I think she said, I think you have to serve before you lead. Serving comes like being mentored. And she mentioned Elisha and Elijah, and also says, especially if you have to mentor, motivate someone to push or position them for success. She said again, yes, relationships are important in leadership. Natasha, good evening. Love this topic. Very interesting discussion. Well, I suppose some of the points you're making is quite riveting. So I'm getting the my Lord and very true from those who are online. But thank you for that, Reverend Grace. Is leadership not an innate quality? Obviously, it can be taught, but is it not an innate quality?
No. Not as I, sorry to jump ahead of but not from what I've seen. I think charisma, personality, having something that's bubbly or magnetic, having some sense of intuition might be what some psychologists or scientists or sociologists, anthropologists call innate. But the application of leadership is a skill. And if you look at skills, cooking, languages, piloting, these are all taught. You know, these are all placed in the abstract into principles, and they're taught to people who then go back and apply them. So this idea that, you know, I'm just a natural born leader, and, you know, I just go with it. I don't need no training. I don't need no training me. What? No, actually, what we see biblically time and time again is that all of us have to undergo a process of leadership. Even if Christ could submit himself to being baptized by creation before he was released and went into his ministry, even as a child, he knows to be about his father's business, but he also needs to listen to his mom, you know. So for us to come to the conclusion that, you know, I'm just a natural born leader, and, you know, that's all right with me is prideful and hurtful to ourselves and to other people. So no.
Okay, Julian, is
Yes,
leadership is leadership an innate quality?
I think within the construct of whatever seat you hold, yes, in some sense. I think where I agree with what Rashad was saying, I think what exposes whether or not somebody has if we're talking about the innate quality of leadership, is crisis. And I think crisis is the acid test of how an individual responds, not just within what they do, but also outside of that. So just to give some context, on last week, Saturday, I think the world saw a footballer have a cardiac arrest on a field. And it was one of the most amazing things I'd ever seen, that the captain of Denmark's team, while he saw his teammate fall to the ground, he was the first one who saw it. And as he saw it, he went and he pulled his tongue out of his throat so he doesn't swallow it. He then alerted the referee to make sure that the referee knew what was going on. After that, he realized that his girlfriend was trying to make her way onto the crowd. He ran over to her to make sure that she was consoled. Then he went and assembled the rest of his team to form a barrier so that he's covered. And so I think when we look at all of that, one of the things that is mighty important that we understand is that this is a captain of a football team. He's not a first responder. He doesn't work for the NHS. He doesn't do any of that. But what we did see are qualities of his leadership come outside of the context of football. And I think so, I guess to the point where you're talking about is it an innate quality? I think we can only really answer that in a moment of crisis. I think if we're talking about, okay, what happens if you are a bank manager? What happens when some money goes missing? Then you follow protocol. But I think what happens when you have no protocol to follow? What happens when instinct kicks in and then all of a sudden we're looking for answers from somebody? And so I think that innate quality that not everybody actually has is that innate quality that not a lot of people, and as I said, it only shows up in moments of crisis. And so I agree, and because I teach it myself, leadership is something that is taught, and the nuances and the particular strains of leadership, you can actually teach that. However, you teach that within the parameters of whatever you're teaching. And so if it is that you're teaching, I don't know, business leadership, you teach it within the parameters of business. If it's spiritual, you teach it sometimes in the context of spiritual. However, I think the cream really rises to the top. And this is when we talk about crisis management. And this is where all leaders, regardless of the field that you're in, need to learn and need to understand and know about crisis management. When it really hits the fan and stuff starts to go wrong, that's when we really begin to see those who are built for this and those who really just want it by title and who just want it by the paycheck. And so to answer the question in a really, really broad way, is it an innate quality? We can only know that when stuff goes wrong.
Can I just say, send that man an offering. Send him an offering right now. Right now. I love it. Thank you, bro. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julian. Thank you. Well, we're looking at this thing from different perspectives. So yeah, very good. Thank you so much. Thank you. All leaders will expire. I think Felicia said something to that effect. You're not here for long. You're not here forever. And all leaders will expire at some point in time. And how actually, before I go to that, I just want to talk about accountability, because I think this is a very big thing that we often overlook. Accountability. And I'm going to, well, should I narrow it to the church context? Yes. Or maybe look at we can relate from our places of work. Effective leadership. If leaders are not being effective, not just according to how I perceive what effectiveness looks like, but if they're not producing change, what does it say about the leader, the leadership's quality or style? And where does accountability sit within the context of poor leadership? For example, in the church, how should this be managed and who should manage it? Open question to everyone.
I mean, I could.
It's a very broad, questions in there, packed question, but
I could jump at it. So, where does accountability sit? There's so many ways that you can dissect this. I think that, well, we'll start from outside of the church context, because we do exist in a world where not everyone subscribes to the idea of God and of Christ. And outside in the business context, shareholders are able to hold directors accountable. So if you have a company, you have people that own stakes in the business that you might not see them for a while, but they get reports. They get reports on your data, your hirings, firings, profit margins, costs, such things. And if they don't like the numbers, they're going to call you up and say, what are you doing with the business that I have a stake in? And what that allows, there's different things that they teach in business school, the principal agent problem, the conflict between ownership and control, all of these things. But what that allows for is a healthy level of tension that the stakeholder might not like because I own the business, but he's running it. And the director might not like because I run the business, but he owns it. So neither of you might like it in the moment, but it's good for the business. It's good for the business. It's a continually implemented model because it's good for business. It works. And so tension and accountability works. It might not feel great. Personally, it doesn't always feel great. So then we can move to the personal. My friends will laugh when they listen to this, but my really close friends who don't, they don't really care about the whole bio. Like, that's not really a thing for them. They won't go a month, even a few weeks without saying to me, Rashawn, that was a really bad idea. That was a really bad idea. Don't let me ever catch you having such a bad idea again. Are you nuts? Like, what's going on? And does it always feel great? No. But it was a really bad idea. When you check it, it was actually really, really bad. And so accountability on a personal level works. I have a theory, and I talk about it with my guys at the university, that I genuinely think And, you know, we'll get to find out when heaven comes back. I genuinely think that if David's best friend, Jonathan, hadn't passed away, I genuinely think that whole foolishness with him and Bathsheba wouldn't have happened. That's just what I think. Because, you know, your boys, you know, you be talking to them like, you know, I'm talking to this girl, you know. And he'd be like, what, for real? Yeah, I'm talking to this girl. Who is she? Oh, I don't know, Bathsheba. What? Bathsheba? No. Pull up. Credits. Run the credits. That can't happen. That's no. Are you nuts? Bathsheba? No. But you know, when Jonathan passed away, when I read David, and you know, we get so much from David. You know, he's the only man to be called a man after God's own heart. But when I read David, especially when he comes into conflict with his own children, when he has to go through different battles, different wars, he had a very strained relationship with his own father, and then the man that he had as a father figure tried to kill him, and then his good friend passed away, and then he had a little conflict with one of his wives. It's like, man, you know, did anyone really know this guy? Did anyone else really have this guy in their heart? And when we have leaders who they know your title and they know your bio and they're concerned with that and they're your fans, so they really aren't going to check you in the way that you need to be checked, it's a recipe for disaster. Yeah. Because not only did David commit the sin, he arranged it organizationally. He delegated it. He had one of his generals kill a man for no reason and then covered it up. And had it not been for the all power and all knowing God who went and told the prophet Nathan, and had Nathan not gone and told the story and sat down and listened to David be like, oh, someone that does that should be stoned. Nathan's like, but it's you. That was you. Brother, and you're here talking bad about other people. You're really talking bad. So for myself, you know, leaders need friends. God said, let us make, I'm not even trying to do this by myself. Let us make man, you know, let us make the world. Let's do it.
Come on.
You know?
Yeah.
So for you to be out here and it's just me and I built this church and I built this business and it was me that did it and I did it with the Holy Spirit. I don't need nobody else to do it. Nah. You know, Jesus had friends, you know. Jesus ate supper with his friends. So I think accountability works when you have people that know you on a deep and personal and intimate level and can tell you when you're doing wrong. And I think whatever context you operate in, it can save your life.
Yeah. But what would you say, sorry, if I can come in, what would you say about Saul though? Because Saul had Samuel. Samuel was Saul's accountability and he still didn't rate the guy. Like he tore his garment. Like, what would you say about leaders like that? Even when they do have accountability, they just think that, well, I'm the first that did it. Because, you know, Saul was the first king of Israel, right? So what would you say about Saul? Because he had Samuel as accountability, but he still didn't regard him as, you know, what would you say about that?
And it's so funny because he should have listened to Samuel because it was Samuel that chose him. If you want to contextualize it, there's so many ways to look at it. Number one, when I think of the relationship between Saul and Samuel, you could argue that if we look at it today, it would be professional. So you have to ask, you know, did Samuel know Saul the man as opposed to Saul the king? Because we see that Samuel spoke over Saul and that he went and chose him under the direction of God. But we also see that Saul was hiding amongst the luggage. And that Saul was hiding amongst the luggage and Samuel called him out. And it's like, man, it would have been nice if one of his brothers or, you know, one of his people, someone his age and stage, you know, knew him. So for that, I say it's the same issue in that, you know, did anyone know Saul the man, Saul the son, Saul the guy who was going to look after his father's donkey, you know, as opposed to Saul the future king? Yes, I'm not saying that, you know, the people that know you and grow up with you never see your potential. But what I would say to your question is that, well, number one, let's start from the worst case scenario. Number one, the principle of he who don't hear must feel still applies. So if your people are telling you things, and I've been there where your people are telling you, no, that might not be a good idea. Maybe you don't want to do that. Maybe you shouldn't. And you want to go ahead with it anyway, you'll fail.
Yeah.
You know, and whatever impact that has is dependent on so many different factors. But when I make the point about David and Jonathan, and there's a beautiful passage of scripture, I believe it's 1 Samuel 23, where Saul is going to look for David in the wilderness, and he can't find David. He can't find him. And then the word says that Jonathan, who was David's closest friend, went up into the wilderness and found him. And what I get from that one is that, boy, your people will always find you, you know. Your people will always know when you're just off. They'll know the difference between when you're off Insta and when you're like maybe depressed. And they'll know the difference between when you're just taking a step back and actually know, you know, you need to be prayed for. You need someone to just keep you company. They'll know the difference between when you're just feeling down and when you might be having suicidal thoughts. Like your people who know you, who have a proximity to you, will know. And I think that it's even good that you mentioned Samuel, because, oh boy, here we go. I think that Samuel knew Saul in a prophetic and spiritual context, but you might not have known the person. And some people can prophesy over you and know things that God's going to do over you and not necessarily know you. And, you know, this is conjecture in the context of the Bible because we don't get all the information about everything, every little thing that Samuel and Saul said. But what I would say to what you said is that we always look at the relationship between the two. You know, was it just a professional relationship, or would Samuel and Saul have just rocked back one evening? That for me is the key difference. And that's what I know that every leader needs to have, because it can get lonely. When they say it's lonely at the top, they ain't joking, you know. And so does that answer your question, sis?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Great.
Yeah.
Great. Ooh, remember to unmute.
Wow.
Eve, I tell you what, just don't push.
I'm resigned to the fact that I won't ever.
Don't push it.
Right. Accountability, Reverend Grace and Julian. I want to hear you touch on this a little bit. How does this sit in the context of poor leadership? How do we, not we, but how does someone get held, or how do we hold someone accountable for ineffective leadership? You know, and who does that from the church perspective?
I'll allow Reverend Grace to answer and go first.
Thank you, Julian. Was that a cop-out? I think that's a really, really good question, and a difficult question to answer because it depends on the structure of the church. It depends on the structure of the denomination. For example, what they call mainline churches. So you've got your Catholic, Anglican, Methodist churches, where they have this structure in place that is built on accountability. So you've got your bishops. The bishops are responsible for the diocese, and the vicars, the ministers within that, and they're based on that, they have this relationship that means the minister is accountable to whoever is higher ecclesially. And then you go to another denomination or another setup where you've got this structure in place. You've got the bishops. You've got the overseer, the bishops, etc. But there might be some autonomy in their leadership, so they can they run their churches. They don't have to report to the bishops. And I think our churches are more in that kind of structure, the latter. But at the same time, there isn't that structure in place. For example, who pastors the pastor? Who looks after the minister when they have needs, or who mentors them? And I think that just gets passed down. the lack of, or if it's in place, it's passed down, and that's what we might be seeing in our different churches as well. But accountability is really important.
Yeah.
It's especially when it comes to well-being, and we've seen that in the last year or so with COVID, and a number of ministers that I've spoken to, not just within UT, but all over, black and white, predominantly denominations, are really suffering. And there is such a strain on leadership because that accountability might not be there. Therefore, they may not have those healthy relationships. They may not have mentors that they can talk to. And we've seen studies in the UK and in the US where many ministers, sadly, are either stepping down, leaving the pastorate, or, in rare cases, they are committing suicide. So I think it comes down for me, that key word, which is relationship. So important. And that's where you get that accountability. And really going back to what what's your name?
Rashawn, yeah.
Rashawn. RJ writes. Rashawn.
I have too many names. That's one thing you know about me. You call me whatever you want.
Oh, Rashawn. What he was saying about accountability, your friends know where you are. Your friends will know if you're depressed, or depressed suicides, thinking, all that sort of stuff. Yeah. And as soon as you get into leadership, it's so easy to be isolated. It's so easy to be lonely. It's so easy to not have any accountability, that you're on your own. Yeah, that's my contribution.
I just want to also, just from a slightly different angle, because I think when we look at when we said the word relationship, and we talk about accountability also, they don't always have to be synonymous. The two of them don't always have to be the same thing. And what I mean by that is, if you have accountability, that's somebody that you explain, or it's somebody that you report or justify your decision making to. And so the purpose of you having accountability is so that your decision makings are in line with whether they be bylaws or constructs or whatever it is of an organization. That sometimes does get lost, in the sense of maybe some people are not held to account the way that they ought to be held to account. And so there are a lot of decision makings that are being made. There are a lot of guidelines that are being ignored. There are a lot of lines that are being blurred. And so I think we have that issue when we have accountability. But I think relationship is an altogether different spectrum, because when we talk about relationship, we're actually now talking about matters of the soul. We're not talking about within the parameters of my day-to-day. We're not talking about the care of a person, an individual. I always liken, when we talk about leadership, I always liken the fact that, when I'm at home, I'm not the boss where my wife is concerned. When I leave and I go to my place of employment, then, people will refer to me in a way that my wife would not. And so I think what we do have to do is that we sometimes do have to learn how to separate those hats from people. And I think what Rashad said was wonderful. I love the fact that when we talk about friendships and we talk about those individuals that you have in your life, and here's the truth, friends are there, and we talk about friends are there to keep you accountable. Sometimes, yes, that is true, but also friends are there to make as a covering of your soul. It's a far greater and a far more less measurable thing than pure accountability. I can be accountable to a stranger. They don't have to need to know me out, just literally on the inside of what I'm doing. They don't have to know anything else. All I have to do is make sure that I report to them, and and what I'm doing follows a particular level of guidelines. That's what accountability is. But relationship, I think, is an altogether different thing. And I think that is a more pressing issue when we talk about leadership. Are there the right relationships in place whereby I can, as Pastor Wayne said, I can feel safe to fail. And not only that, I can feel safe to verbalize my concerns and not feel judged for it. I can feel safe to if I'm not sure whether or not I'm making the right decision, I can verbalize that and not make it seem like it's a matter of weakness. And so all of those things are pivotal to relationships where leadership is concerned. I don't believe that, in some ways, I don't think accountability is the problem. I think you can put those things in place and you can have robust accountability. I think what we're talking about is a far deeper thing, and we're talking about actual matters of men's and women's hearts. We're talking about souls, and that comes with a level of vulnerability that is often lost when we talk about leadership.
Wow, thank you. Thank you so much. We've gone on and on and on about leadership, and we haven't even touched on legacy yet. So clearly we won't be answering, we won't have time to answer all the questions on leadership tonight, or to, elaborate a bit further. But I want to ask a controversial question. In the age of inclusivity and gender equality, does gender really matter when it comes to leadership? I could say, are women better leaders than men?
It does matter, yes.
But does gender really matter?
Yeah.
And in today's context as well.
It does.
Bishop Wayne and Julian, yes, go ahead. You can start us off, Julian.
No, well, you know what?
Well,
I was going to say with Julian, and this may make me unpopular, I'm very unpopular, but it absolutely matters.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And there's a reason, there's an argument for it within the church, whether it matters within the church context, yes or no. And we could argue the ramifications of women bishops, women pastors, etc., and male pastors. We could argue the ramifications within the business context. Now, I don't want to get myself into trouble here, but I think we've stumbled upon a massive problem as it relates to leadership, gender roles, and all that sort of stuff. Because, and I've got 2 daughters. I am a minority in my house, right? Let me just say that. Man, I'm getting myself into trouble already because I don't know how to articulate this properly. But let me put it like this. I had a conversation the other day with my daughter, and I asked her this question. I asked her, I said, do you think the gender pay gap is a real thing? And if you do, why? And so we began to talk about whether or not gender was an issue as it relates to pay in the workplace. I.e., you get paid less because you're a woman. You get paid less and you are, quote unquote, worth less in the workplace because you're a woman. And we had this massive conversation in the car. And basically, when we whittled it down, we said it may be one of the factors. It may be a contributing factor, but perhaps it's not the only factor. And so, we went through it and said, well, if, for example, if a woman has a child, 2 children, 3 children, and is out of the work environment for 8 years, and a man that started at the same time as her doesn't have to have the child, do the maternity for 3 to 6 months, and then have another one, etc., etc. What happens is the man progresses through his career whilst the woman is doing actually the far nobler thing as it relates to children. And I heard this guy, and I won't mention his name, but he said this. He said, the day that becoming a mother can be monetized is the day when we change our attitude towards leadership.
Right.
And if you understand that concept, what it literally means is that the reason why there's a difference in the pay gap gender-wise is not necessarily because you are a woman. It's not necessarily because you are a Black person. It's not necessarily because of the stuff and the categories we like to lump people in, but there are factors that come into play that actually make these things reality. And I think that, without putting a too fine a point in it, one of the reasons why leadership matters and gender matters in leadership has getting myself into trouble. Julian, what were you saying there? Did you...
Listen, when this is
all right,
let me just mute myself. Listen.
If Bishop,
I mean,
is go ahead, sir. Go ahead.
I was going to say one of the reasons why it matters, you know, is because it's biblical, and that this is we can't get away from it. And I've got no problem with saying that I am the first among equals, and that includes my home, that includes my church, that includes where I am, and that doesn't mean that you know if you go to the Proverbs 31 woman, she was everything a man was, quote unquote, is, but a woman. So much so that the Bible says, who can find such a one? And if you could find her, you couldn't afford her because she's so rare and precious. The great thing about that is that actually we understand that it's possible. It's not outside of the realms of any sort of a possibility. It's not illegal. It's not something that is not desired. But the truth is that there's a biblical assignment that I believe, and that I believe is right, that gender forms. You can see how much I'm struggling. This is political. It becomes political. Gender forms an important conversation as it relates to leadership. Let me leave it there, and someone just say the prayer for me, please.
Well done. Well, you did a good job.
Felicia, Reverend Grace.
You did a good job, Bishop. You did a good job. We're still friends.
Felicia or Reverend Grace, do you have, from a female perspective?
I don't really want to get into this debate because I think, one, we can't really do it justice in the few minutes that we have, and it's very controversial. But I firmly believe, as someone who heard the Holy Spirit say to me when I was 18 years old, that I was going to be a minister, and I was going to a denomination, not the one I'm in currently. I was going to a denomination where women were not allowed to do anything. We had women, when you had your women's meeting, you'd have to have a male present. And this is not too long ago. This is like 30 years ago. Growing up as a teenager, I was in that environment. Women they couldn't preach, they couldn't do anything. And then the Holy Spirit says to an 18-year-old woman, you are going to be a minister. I've called you to be a minister. And I thought that I was hearing things because that was not the denomination I was in. And, fast forward, God had his way. So I don't think it should matter. It matters to some people, but it shouldn't matter. That's my position.
Didn't I say to yourself the mute button?
Fair enough, as some may say. Thank you for that. I'm gonna quickly go into legacy, touch on legacy before, because we're coming to a close very shortly. Legacy. What when we talk about legacy, what are we talking about, and why is legacy so important? I use a very simple analogy at the start of at the beginning of this discussion about the importance of a relay and the importance of handing over, passing the baton onto the person in front of you when running whatever leg of the relay you're running. It's not the speed, it's not the distance, it's just that one change. Because if that baton falls, it changes every single thing about the race, right? Why is this transfer so important? What is legacy, and why is it so important? Anybody can take it. And just to add to that, are we seeing a lot of baton changes happening in our churches today?
Maybe I'll come in here and maybe I could segue as well. back to the previous thing, and this is why it's important to make a distinction between the corporate and the church, because the Bible clearly says that your sons and daughters shall prophesy.
Yeah.
All right, and so there is an inclusivity statement within that as it relates to the church and the progression of the church spiritual gifts and outworkings. Some things I've always found, again, and let me state this, some things I've always found problematic within the context, especially of the Black majority church, is that we can have women be pastors, but we can't have women be bishops. And I find that controversial in itself. And what I say that, and this is where I'm aligning myself, and probably I'm not contradicting myself, but I'm aligning myself to some of these arguments that say, actually, as it relates to legacy, I think we've got a massive problem. And the reason why I think we've got a problem is because, again, it goes back to the message. It goes back to how we see and how we view the purpose for leadership. It goes back to whether or not, everything we've mentioned before, accountability, relationship. And I don't know how personal I should get on this one. But one of the reasons why I stepped away from employment within the I don't know, why am I getting myself into trouble tonight, Eve? One of the reasons why I stepped away from employment and did so with a heavy heart is because I felt that actually there was a duty of legacy that I would not be able to fulfill, which gave me the heavy heart.
Right.
But also it was the fact that I didn't have, can I say this word advisedly? I didn't have the confidence that there was enough importance given to the generation that was coming next. And I felt, honestly, without going into, it was nearly 7 years ago, so nobody cares about the consequences of it, but without going into the details, I thought, honestly, that if I remain in a situation where I honestly thought that there was no consideration to what was coming next, then actually I am resigning to the point where you might as well dig a hole and start shoveling. Because actually something that is within inside leaders and within inside anyone who calls themselves a leader is the desire to pass on the baton. Hence, I need to make myself redundant. And if I don't see that in the leadership that I sit under, then I need to move myself away from that. I think legacy is important. I think that my whole desire now, again, I mentioned I've got 2 daughters. There's a difference between heritage and legacy. And for me, it's actually, heritage is something that they will literally inherit. It's a part of their heritage. But legacy is what I leave for them to do, how they actually walk in the way of that. So I hope I've mixed this up enough. I think that's important. I don't think we do or have done historically a good job of legacy.
Yeah. Anyone else? Legacy. Why is this so important?
I think
seeing the baton being changed, especially in our churches, are the batons being passed on?
I think when we're looking at, are the batons being passed on? Again, it depends on what you classify the race to be, and it depends on what you classify what the baton represents. I think in some ways there are batons that are spiritually passed on that in the flesh never manifest. And sometimes that causes, and he was allowed to be personal. I'm going to be, because I know a little bit of his story. So Pastor Wayne was to say, well, we might assume that the baton within a particular organization was not passed on, but have we actually looked at the fact that where he currently is at the moment is a passing on of the baton in and of itself. It probably just wasn't within the race that you wanted him to run. And so I think that there are certain areas of the race, and there are certain elements of the race that we look at. And I think sometimes we're so desperate to make sure it's done a particular way that when it's not, we make the assumption that there cannot be any passing on. I have no natural children yet, but I classify myself to have, a few spiritual ones, and I hold them very, very dear to my heart. And some of the things that I say, and I'm not that old, but I'm not that young at the same time, just in case you're wondering. Pastor Wayne is more of a big brother to me than a father, so that just puts context of age. I remind them all the time that I won't be here forever. And sometimes I think, and I do say this all the time, and when we talk about leadership, for me, it's very difficult to talk about leadership without talking about exit. It's very difficult to talk about leadership without talking about death, because I think within the confines of death, it puts an urgency in the leader's heart to make sure that they're doing everything effectively. So for example, just to give context to that, the Lord has graced me to plant a church. And I said to the Lord that I will give the rest of my life to the gospel, but I am not pastoring past 55 years old. And what that does is, when I think about that, it means that I have roughly just over 20 years to be as impactful as I can. So now that urgency that is now developed both in my heart, in my spirit, and my mind means every single day that I wake up, I'm giving the best of myself to whoever is around me and to my assignment, because I've already mentally placed in myself, I don't have forever at this. If I assumed that my position was going to be until 80, 90 years old, then there's no urgency right now for me to do anything, in truth. And so I think legacy, we cannot talk about legacy without even picturing the future with me not present. I have to. In order for me to be effective when it comes to legacy, every conversation I have, every interaction I have with my loved ones, every moment I have for instruction and teaching, it all has to be within the parameters of me not being present. And as long as I can maintain that and I can do that, then when that day finally does come, when I am not here, then what will be spoken of me will be lived through my children and grandchildren, etc., etc. And even if that day does come, God forbid, that I am no longer here and I don't have natural children, then whoever I have impacted and whoever God has given me within my sphere now to impact, I will still live on through those people. And that's the only way, in my opinion, that you can actually measure legacy. You measure it by the absence of a person and the impact that they have left, not by just because they've sat in the seat that you sat in. That's not legacy. You can do that on a bunch of things, but it is really about how much of yourself is really left on the earth when you are not here. That's really how you measure it, as far as I'm concerned.
Muted.
Listen, I think I've told you what I do for a living, right? My work. Can you imagine? If I keep forgetting this mute button, Jesus. No, it doesn't happen in my work life. Right. It's 10 minutes to the hour now. So, and we're going to wrap up. But just one final question. Jojo, I'm used to calling Rashawn Jojo, so pardon me. Just for you in particular, what, as a young leader coming up, what have you seen or not seen that you'd like to see as it relates to leadership when it comes to millennials, when it comes to younger people like yourself? What would you like to see as it relates to younger leaders? What would you like to see passed on or change? What have you seen working good where leadership is concerned? Like, qualities that, yes, I can copy this, I can use this. This can guide me, this can help me in the future to become a better leader. And what have you not to see? What would you like to see?
I'll start from the outside in. So I think when I look around at my peers, and I think about some of the things that we can benefit from, some of the things that we can, that can help propel us to the next stage and to go and do things that, you know, that our forefathers and foremothers, and the foremothers are so very important, because if not for the praying mothers, boy, I really can't tell you. But I think one thing that I think in general we could use just to propel us is space. You know, just a bit of space, as Pastor Wayne says, or I'm gonna call him Wayne because, you know, we don't do it for other gifts, like we don't, but yeah, but just what Wayne said, you know, space to fail in a controlled way, and just that reassurance that, okay, that could have gone better, but I'm not disqualified, you know, I'm not gonna get put on the back bench. And I think just that reassurance that, you know, you can do this. And if it doesn't work out well, it's not the end of the world. Because one thing that I think our mothers and fathers don't appreciate, because even we ourselves are still working our heads around it, is that even myself, sometimes we genuinely think this walk is meant to be easy sometimes. Mm-hmm. And here's what I mean by that. We see finished products on Insta. We see finished products on Twitter. We see highlight reels. We see best bits, snippets, filters, you know, special effects. We don't see nitty gritty knocking on the door of Brixton in 1960s, trying to raise money for a church in a country that just the other day, you know, is trying to get rid of you. Like, we don't see that. We just think, oh, you know, we just gathered on church on Sunday, danced around 3 times, and the church was built. And I think that we now move on to personally, what I'd like to see is some scars. I'd like to see some mistakes. I'd like to see some skeletons. And here's what I mean by that. I'd like you, again, you know, this is within the context of a relationship. And like what my bro Julian rightly said, accountability and relationship are different. I think both are needed. And I think one point I wanted to mention for him after his point was that when you look at, you know, when you start to think about our pastors' relationships, you start to see them as people. And a lot of times, like when you're a child at school, you don't really see your teachers as people. You see them as machines that shut down at the ending of the day and then wake up again at the beginning of the school day. Sometimes you can see your pastors as machines that, you know, sit there during the week or wake up for a prayer meeting and then shut down again, and then switch back on for a sermon and then shut down again. And actually they're human beings. And one thing I would like to see is, I would like you to tell me, yo, it was hard. It was really difficult, and I wasn't perfect at it. And here's how it went wrong. I still to this day think about it sometimes. There might even be things I wish I could do differently, but God was present with me. And even though I worked harder than everybody, it wasn't actually me. It was the grace of God that was with me. And I think if I heard that, oh man, I would see the whole concept of what it means to minister so differently. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Thanks. And thanks for being so real with it as well. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. And I'm just going to ask the rest of the panel. As was mentioned before, leaders will expire. How should current leaders or ministers or current leaders prepare for their succession or prepare their successor? What do we need to see? How do we need to see the process of preparing individuals to take over, to take the baton? One thing, I used to do athletics. Unfortunately, I cannot run. I can't. I literally cannot. I can hardly run these days. But when I used to do athletics, and there's something that they always teach us in practice, and as soon as you reach a particular part of the track, you say reach. The person in front of you should not be looking behind them. The minute you reach a certain, distance away from that individual in front of you, you wouldn't shout it, but you'd say reach. And all that individual has to do is start moving, and the left hand goes out behind them. They should not look back. So they are trusting you to place the baton, waiting for the baton to, just to feel that touch in their hand. And that is why I think that analogy is so important. The minute you feel that touch in your hands, you grab and you're gone. You're not looking back at your mate. You're gone, right? How do leaders, or how should leaders prepare their successors to take over? Prepare their successors for that transfer. What do we need to see?
I think what we need to do is we need to recognize that sometimes, I know within the kingdom of God, especially within our church contracts, we talk a lot about seasons and things like that. But I do think there is also windows of opportunity. And just to use Eve's analogy, even within a relay, you have, and a track would indicate you have a certain amount of time in order to pass the baton. Mm-hmm. And even if you go outside of that box, then it actually doesn't matter if you pass the baton or not. Yeah. So I think what we need to do, I think what leaders have to do is that leaders have to recognize their timing, and leaders have to recognize that there is only a certain, and I can't do it too early and I cannot do it too late. But when the time comes, I have to be brave enough. Now, for a lot of leaders, sometimes that might come a little bit early than you anticipated. Sometimes it might come a little bit later, but the point is that it will come at some point. If we're going to liken this to a race, it will come at some point. And so I think the responsibility where leaders have is that when you recognize that time, have enough humility, have enough bravery, number one, and also trust that the individual that you're passing it on to, you have taught and you've developed and you've done enough whereby you can pass the baton on successfully. I think if you are questioning any of those areas within your leadership, then it actually doesn't matter when you pass the baton on, in my opinion. If you have not adequately prepared that person, then you can pass it whenever you want to. Then they're just going to come with their own areas and their own issues when they start to run their leg. And so for me, it's about what we need to do, what we need to see. Leaders need to recognize their time, need to recognize at the moment of passing it on, let me be brave and let me be bold enough to actually do so.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that.
I'll just come in here really quickly.
Yes, please.
It's a statement I said earlier.
We have about 5 minutes, so yeah.
I just want to reiterate this in that one of the key cultures that I'm building at Life in terms of the context of our Christian expression within our church is that I'm the first amongst equals. And that is a statement that I will hold on to, and I will continue to say and continue to repeat, because hopefully what that will do, it will recognize that at some point, another equal will become the first. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah.
And essentially, right now, my eyes are peeled. I'm looking both within and without for who that next first will be. That I will still be an equal, but at some point I won't be the first. And so my whole intention is, again, make myself redundant, move to the point and be more, even more direct. That first, they may not do things like me.
Yeah.
And indeed, by the time comes, which hopefully won't be in too many years from now, they will have such a way with the mechanisms of how things need to be done that I will be questioning, not from the position of putting down, but from the position of I don't understand, help me understand, so that actually I can help again push them from behind to that place where we will get the success that really, and we've got to stress this, the success of leadership is not how big the church is. And I'm talking about Christian leadership now. The success of Christian leadership is not how big your church is, but is whether or not you have successfully conveyed the revelation of grace, which is why Jesus came.
Yeah.
If you have successfully conveyed and grown people in grace, then actually your leadership, your tenancy within that box of leadership has been successful. So for me, Rashawn, stay close, bro. Make sure you get my number after this call. You never know what might happen.
I'm here.
My brother Julian, I know it's called the well now, but it might be the life well soon. A deeper well. Whatever. All I'm saying is that the whole purpose of this leadership expression is to build the kingdom, not to build another empire. And if we can do that successfully, then we'll succeed.
Thank you. Reverend Grace, or yes, quickly, can you just touch on that? How do we prepare our successors?
So I'm looking at this in my doctorate actually. So I think really it all starts with being a developing leader. There has to be that mindset. So everything that has already been said is absolutely what I do support, but also if they are not developing leaders, they will not be thinking about the next generation or who's coming next in line to develop them and leave a legacy. So starting from the outside, from the outset, and then if they are developing, they need to identify someone, look for someone, have a transition plan that is for a particular set of time, as Julian talking about that, that window of opportunity. Within that, though, is really crucial. It's not just about identifying someone, but it's also preparing the congregation for transition, because the congregation will be going through that change too. And then finally, the exit plan is about supporting the person who's coming in, or if the person's already in place, doing a great handover to ensure that they too are successful and have a legacy to continue. You're on mute.
Sis Eve, you're still on mute.
Listen, please forgive. That's it. That's it. I'm known for not unmuting. Right. Felicia, what would you like to see in terms of passing on the baton? What would you like to see current leaders doing, or how do they do that?
I mean, yeah. Going back to the Bible, I was just looking at some of the leaders, how they did it, and I'm looking at Moses and how he did it, and how he passed the baton on to Joshua. And the first thing is in Deuteronomy 31 from verse 14, you hear the Lord telling Moses, "Behold, the days approach when you must die. Call Joshua and present yourself in the tent of meeting that I may commission him." And Moses and Joshua went and presented themselves in the tent of meeting. Now, the issue that we have in the church right now is that people are waiting to die to pass on the baton, and nobody wants a dead mantle. I'm sorry, nobody wants a dead mantle. Pass it on when you're alive, but nobody wants a dead mantle. No one can receive a dead mantle, right? However, when I'm looking in the scriptures, I'm thinking to myself, okay, so how did Moses know that Joshua? Of course, God told him. So that's one thing. Our spiritual leaders must be able to hear God. Even if it's in the beginning of them establishing ministry, in the middle or the end. But it doesn't always have to be that you pass on the baton because you're about to die. I think, I can't remember which one of our panelists spoke about it, but you know, sometimes you can take the back seat and you could pass the baton on, and then what happens is, if things are not going accordingly, etc., you bring them back and say, look, I'm seeing that you're not really leading the right way, let me give you advice, etc. But the first thing we see here in the scripture is that the Lord tells a leader, this is the person, or it might not just be one person, it could be a group of people, right? So that's the first thing. Training. When I looked at the introduction of Joshua, it's from Exodus 17:9. You know, when Moses is encountering warfare with the Amalekites, he calls to Joshua and he tells Joshua in verse 9, choose for us men and go out and fight with Amalek. Tomorrow I will stand in the top of the hill with the staff of God in my hands. Later on, we know that when Moses went at the top of the hill, Aaron was on his right, Caleb was on his left, and Joshua was on the battlefield. Now, it's a thing where sometimes our leaders want to do everything. And if you look even at those who are assisting the warfare, who are assisting the work of God, you had Moses, you had Aaron, who were the fathers of Israel, right? Then you had Caleb, another young person who was right next to them. And then you had somebody out there, like on the battlefield or into the world. For example, we could call Joshua like an evangelist, right? So my thing is, you know, train and run with your successor. Somebody spoke about being vulnerable. Let them see every aspect of you, when you're weak, when you're weary, when you're strong, when ministry is going great, when ministry is not going great, so that they can learn from every aspect. Because when you look at Joshua, by the time Joshua came, he understood, he saw Moses's weaknesses. He saw when he understood that, you know, Moses couldn't cross over because he did this mistake. And so Joshua dared not to make the same mistakes as Moses, lest his inheritance be taken away from him or withheld from him, right? So I think our leaders today, run with your successes. Don't put them on the back bench. Don't let them just warm or be your armor bearer and carry your Bibles everywhere until you're dead. Train them. And it doesn't even have to be somebody right beside you, right? It could be a group of people. And so I think, yeah, the first thing, run with your successes, and then train them, and then in the scriptures, give commands, give commission, because even in Exodus 17:14, it says, then the Lord said to Moses, write this as a memorial in a book and recite it in the ears of Joshua, that I will utterly blot out the memory of the Amalekites. So that's even legacy, because Moses has died, but then later on, Joshua will remember the instructions, the commandments that his leader has given them. So I just think that, again, relationship, we've spoken about it, relationship, training up, accountability, just making sure that you keep them close and you don't have to pass on the baton after you're dead, because again, nobody wants a dead mantle. So yeah, that's me.
Thank you so much. Wow. We could go on and on and on and on, and thank God I'm not muted this time. We could go on and on. There's this thing is really, really deep, and I don't think we've really gone into the core of all of this. But I just want to say thank you so much to Julian Mitchell, Reverend Grace Balogun, Pastor Wayne Brown, Rashawn Grant, Felicia Watkins. Thank you guys so much for just coming on tonight and sharing your passion about leadership, the facts, for enlightening us on the different aspects, the different perspective, whether it's corporate, whether it's from the church setting or but thank you so much for sharing on tonight's discussion. I do hope that those listening, based on the responses I'm seeing, it seemed like people have been enlightened, like myself. But thank you so much for sharing on tonight's discussion. I'm going on and on and on, but I'm really grateful for that. You know, as we're called to leadership, as Christians, as you know, we're called to leadership, and we do have a responsibility for, you know, helping to shape the future, a better future, hopefully. Like the David that you mentioned earlier, Moses of their days, like the Nelson Mandela, the Martin Luther Kings of their time. You know, let's continue to seek and to teach our younger generation. And I'm talking, I'm not old, you know, I'm not that, yeah, I'm not there yet. But let's continue to teach those who we have influence over. Leadership is about influence. It's about the next generation, bequeathing to posterity. That's something I learned in primary school that I'll never forget, a term. You know, the question is, what will be your legacy when you're gone? How will you be remembered? True leadership is measured by the success of the follower or the followers. As parents or leaders in any capacity, we should aim to promote independence of those around us. And like Bishop Wayne Brown said earlier, it's allowing the space for somebody to, and giving people the ability to lead and the space to fail, you know, and we keep correcting until we get it right. Jesus said he had to go. And one day our leaders, those who are, you know, our predecessors, they will have to go. You know, true leaders should not seek power, but they should seek to empower. They should not employ followers, but they should seek to deploy followers in order to procure a legacy. And like I said at the beginning, with great power comes great responsibility. And we know leadership isn't easy. So may God help us to be true and effective leaders in our time. It's not easy, but may God help us. And we can only do it with God's help, as Reverend Grace mentioned. It's a spiritual thing. We can only do it with the grace of God. So guys, I want to thank you for contributing on tonight's panel. And I look forward to something like this again. And Bishop Wayne, we're still waiting on you for you to do your thing, as I mentioned before. So yeah, well, thanks so much, Reverend Grace. I look forward to reading the outcome of your research. Hopefully you get the opportunity to publish it. Something like this is vital.
Please.
You know, and the church needs to know. We need to know.
Yeah.
So yes. I seriously look forward to the outcome and the findings and the results to read. And, you know, we never know. We get a different perspective from it. Rashawn, congratulations, you've graduated. And I'm looking forward to your book next year, mates.
Thank you so much.
What's it called? Men of the Good?
Men of the Good, yes.
I'm looking forward to that. I'll pass on if Bishop Wayne, you don't mind just sending him your details in private?
No.
On Zoom.
Everyone, just find me, get me, send me. I'm not good at the Facebook Messenger, but you know, please.
I'll pass on your number to him so he can.
Please do. I need to get Grace and Felicia down to give a word at life at some point. So.
God, yes. Felicia, thank you so much, my dear. Thank you. I love your passion. I love your fire. Thank you for bringing it tonight as usual. And I wish you all the best for your business. And I do need to speak off air with you at some point in time. Julian, I could sit and listen to you for an entire day. Honestly, you know, I'm just mesmerized just listening. You put me in. Yeah, you do. But thank you so much for your contribution and for giving that spin, that different perspective on things as well. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Guys, good night. Thank you for your time. I'm 15 minutes over. Thank you for your time. God bless you. Have a great weekend.
Bye.
And those of you who are football fans, all the best to your teams. All right. So, thank you. God bless.
Bye-bye.
God bless. Bye.